Hi guys.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Can you introduce yourselves?
Oh, hi, my name is Tanya.
My name's Al.
And where are you two right now?
Right now, we're in California. But I'm based in Colorado for the time being. And he's
Based in Berkeley.
mhm.
So
So
yeah,
you flew down to Seattle for the week, for a
kind
few
of.
days.
Kind of, kind of.
So she flew into SF. We hung out in Berkeley. Then we drove to LA to hang out with friends for Friendsgiving.
Oh, cool. Okay, so I'm just going to tell everyone how I know you two. It's like, so I know them separately and together, and they're my nung, which in English means like they're like my younger bro and my younger sister. And the reason why I wanted to have this conversation with you two is because to me, it's like I endear the both of you because you two represent the new generation. And I think when we have our talks together, we have like a lot of things in common, which is really strange because we're like from different generations. And then there's a lot of things I learned from you two too, from your perspective. So now that you two are over there studying, I have like the questions I have is how does it feel to be like an Asian and Thai, because Al, you're half Thai, half Singaporean, and like Tanya, you are Thai, um, studying over in the US.
Oh goodness. So a little bit more about me specifically is that I was born and raised in the US, but I was born in Chicago, but I grew up in Colorado. And I think over the course of like the 10, 20 years past, Colorado's changed a lot. It's diversified a lot. But I remember like from 2002 to 2010, it was very predominantly, conservative, white. The demographic was very much that. And growing up, like I was the only colored kid in my class. I was the only Asian. I was the only non-white kid. From like kindergarten well into elementary school. So I mean, of course, you get exposure to like the typical stereotypes and racism, but you don't really realize it at the time because you're a kid. But like looking back, I mean, that's what a lot of it was. And also, how do you feel? How does the household play a role in making you feel like that difference is not something to make you feel ashamed of too? And I
Right.
think I have my parents to thank a lot for that. Because I ended up retaining a lot of my Thai culture. I can speak, I can read and write the language. And I never felt that I needed to be, American or like whatever that definition means and like say goodbye to that Thai part of me or try to suppress it in any way to fit in. So was it difficult? Yes. And didn't make it any easier. My parents had a restaurant business that opened up in 2005. So that in itself, you get a lot of challenges as well. You see a wide spectrum of people, so definitely dealing with a lot of those pressures and stuff early on in life. But yeah, it was good exposure, I guess, builds character. Yeah.
No, I'm like my eyes kind of grew because the fact that you what you just shared with me, we have a lot of parallels because when I grew up in California, back in the day, I grew up in a predominantly Caucasian town. So I pretty much stood out. And I went through my like, my situations. I mean, I had like they called me little egg roll. I was either little egg roll or little wonton. That was
I
my
was
name.
one.
No, are you serious?
Yeah, they called me. It rhymes with wonton. They called me Tauntaun. Not wonton.
So,
I'm
uh,
serious. They
so
did.
like, I'll be P wonton and you can be Nong ton ton.
They're so cute. Okay, I love it.
And it's actually really cute now.
Normal. I love it. It's
So
cute
that's
now.
so
Cute
that's
back
one
then.
parallel, which is quite eye-opening. I'm like, wow, two different generations, but we have that in common. Plus, my parents had a Thai restaurant too.
Oh,
Yeah,
wonderful.
which is so strange. So like through the Thai restaurant, I mean, there's a lot of experiences being in a Thai family owned restaurant where you experience all these different like scenarios and everything, which is really strange. We never really got into this conversation, which I thought was it's quite interesting. So Al, for you grew up where?
Yeah. So well, currently I am I think I've been in the US for 8 years. This is my 8th year here. So I'm currently based in New Haven, Connecticut. Well, sort of. New Haven, Connecticut, third year of my PhD, and based in California for the semester. So it's been weird. So I grew up in Singapore for 12 years. So I kind of was there till Mohawk, so primary six. And then after that, I moved to Sydney for 2 years, Australia. So on the suburbs of Sydney, so the west side in the hills area. And then I moved to South Carolina for high school. So about 10 minutes out of Charlotte, across the North Carolina, South Carolina border, place called Fort Mill. Went there for 4 years. Also very similarly, very few Asians in my cohort. Yeah, so I did that for 4 years, and then went back to Singapore for the army, and then came back for exchange, undergrad, as well as kind of like here for a PhD now. So kind of been in and out of the US, very different experiences. And even then, like California to like the Northeast versus the South, they're all very different cultures.
Yeah, I'm like people don't realize that, because I think we've all experienced living in the US. You two are there. I grew up there, and different parts of the US is really different too. And then also being in Asia itself, because I was in Singapore for quite some time too. Singapore is different from Thailand. So it's just I just like going back to when I was like introducing us, it's like just so interesting how so many parallels are there regardless of the generation gap. And then there's a whole part of being Asian and then also having a Western mindset, which you two have, which I have also. So when you two do come back to Asia, when like when you're like in Thailand or in Singapore, or Tanya, when you're back in Thailand, do you find like a little sort of culture clash with how you think, like your mindset?
Definitely.
So many. Okay. Hi.
Please do go first.
I mean, there's so many, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. Like, there's so many kind of like we talk about this a lot, because every time we go back, it's like there's an accent thing, there's like aความคิด, like mindset perspective. And even between Singapore and Thailand, it's quite different, I think. So about ต้องปรับตัว, ต้องแบบ adapt differently to the different cultures. And even here, the diaspora communities, even in the Thai community here, there's so many different kind of ways of being, ways of seeing, or talking to people. But I think when we go back to Bangkok, it's just the most like, apparent, like, oh wow, this is kind of like back home, but it changes every time we go back. Both like us changing here and like growing up in some sense, but also like when we go back, because we're between like family, friends, kind of work sometimes. And so like I don't know, it's been quite interesting, especially like for us. Tanya was working in kind of the hospital, and I was working in a crypto company over the summer. So like when we meet, it's a very different experience than when we're organizing stuff for an NGO outside. So I don't know, it's just the mindset is very different, and then we're bringing all that into our conversations. I don't know, it's just a lot to unpack. And one of the things I think is just the way we speak to like different people, like we have to adapt, like, don't bap, especially ผู้ใหญ่. I think that's one of the biggest things when we go from the US, like talking to professors here is like, call them by first name, it's chill. Especially like PhD students, we don't really do a lot of like, professor this, professor that. But in Thai, อาจารย์ ผู้ใหญ่ elders, it's a very different kind of hierarchy. So that's kind of one of the few. Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like going off of that, also like this too. Yeah.
No, I was just gonna share that I think it's still the same then. Like even like from when I moved over until like to both of you, I think there's still that hierarchy that we still that's still it's part of the culture that we have to adapt to. And I guess getting your perspectives shows me that there's still hurdles. I mean, things are progressing along the way, but it's still like small steps. And I guess that's something that we can attest to, because I guess that's why we tend to sync, because a lot of how we see things they still exist. Yeah. So how, I mean, you two were recently in Thailand, because you two represent like the new generation. what are things that you find is promising for the future in terms of your generation and things that are hurdles?
Goodness.
Let's go with the promising. What do you see
I'll
that?
take first.
Yeah,
Start with
What's
I mean, I think there's quite a few things, right? I think there are quite a few things that are promising. So, I mean, like just thinking about the past like 10 years or so, like the different kind of like principles. I mean, one big thing is climate change, right? I think the awareness of climate change or the environment is one thing that's like grown a lot in the past 10 years. And even if it's just like, oh, I want to like do something from a plastic straw to like be an activist to like speak out against corporations, the whole range, I think the public perception, at least in Thailand, has shifted. I think we talked about this too, Pia, Chapa, about the environment and thinking about, so even though there are some kind of like aesthetics to that, I think that public perception shift is one thing, and I think quite a few things have moved in that direction, which I think is helpful. So I think that is to me very like promising. Like I think public perceptions of certain important issues have been moving, and I think that's a good thing.
Does that have to do with the fact that because we live in a digital age too? Do you feel? Definitely, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a matter of like communications are faster, all of that. But also like kind of the intensity of different things. There's that component, but also it produces new challenges, right? So I think the digital age definitely reduces certain frictions, like we can communicate faster, get information faster. But for example, then you get fake news or other kind of like new challenges. And so I think it works both ways, like being in digital age.
Yeah, I definitely agree with both of you. I think at the same time with the digital age, it's like a lot of times people are just looking at things on the surface, what's trending, and then you have the analytics on top of that kind of just pushes what people are reading over and over and over, and they're not actually going and taking that extra steps to look at other options. I think that's like the cons of it. The pros of it is that you get information more instantaneously if you know how to find those like information. So the hurdles for your generation that you see, that's kind of concerning. I mean, this doesn't have to be with overall, like just being there or what you see like globally.
Goodness. Something I think is because we have so much, we can just okay, so like through โทรศัพท์ใช่ไหมเราสามารถแบบเห็นชีวิตคนอื่นได้แบบง่ายมากเลยสมมติว่าไปดูไอจีของคนสักคนหนึ่งชีวิตเขาดูเหมือนว่าโหแม่งอยากได้ชีวิตแบบนี้อะไรเงี้ยหรือเราเห็นความ success ของคนอื่นคนอื่นชอบโพสต์นู่นนั่นนี่แต่คนเราเวลาเราโพสต์เนี่ยเราจะ selective ในสิ่งที่เราโพสต์ลงไปใช่ไหมคะส่วนใหญ่มักจะเป็นแบบสิ่งที่ดีสวยงามตลอดเวลาแต่บางทีคนที่เขาดูคนที่เขาเห็นคือธัญญามองว่ามันเพิ่ม stress ให้นะแบบด้วยการที่เราไม่รู้ตัว so I feel like something that's ever growing is the competition in society and the amount of stress that we have from it without realizing it, I feel like.
So in a way, like a lot, like with the social media, what you're seeing and what you're exposed to can actually affect you emotionally. It can either, which is
and
not
if you
all
adverse, like,
and what would
impact.
your advice be with that? Would it be to have like social media free days, or I mean,
no, I think it all comes down to I'm a strong believer that บางอย่างมันสอนกันไม่ได้แต่ยูต้องเรียนรู้ด้วยตัวเองคือถ้าคุณมั่นใจในสิ่งที่คุณมีพอใจในสิ่งที่คุณมีแล้วก็คือถ้าเรา realize ได้ว่าอันนี้คือ reality ของเราอันนี้คือแค่สิ่งที่เราเห็นเราไม่จำเป็นที่ต้องพยายามได้แบบนั้นหรือพยายามที่จะเป็นแบบนั้นอิจฉาเขาอยากเป็นแบบเขานู่นนั่นนี่แต่คือถ้าเราพอใจหรือแบบเรามั่นใจในตัวเราเข้าใจสถานการณ์ของเราอะไรอย่างเงี้ยมันก็จะโอเคแต่หนูว่าเรื่องแบบเนี้ยมันต้องเรียนรู้เองเช่นแบบเรื่องของความเป็นคนไทยอย่างเงี้ย for example สำหรับหนูใช่ไหม when your whole world your whole society is telling you that being this is different it's not good it's looked down upon นู่นนั่นนี่ how do you retain that part of you how do you still want to be identify as that thing that other people are telling you that you shouldn't And like, I think I was able to do it. And in part, it was a large influence from my family as well, but it was my choice. I've met so many other people that had the same situation as I did, that I grew up with, you know, Thai Americans, and today they can't speak Thai. And some of them just refuse this part of their culture. You know, they want to be, you know, purely something else. And that's their decision. That's fine. I respect that. But I mean, it's difficult, especially, you know, when so many factors are influence you towards one way. It's difficult to resist that.
Yeah, it's it's like it's really layered, because it's like we break it down. There's a whole being Asian and living in the Western society, and then like what you both shared with me, it's like even that alone, there are different types of groups. There's are different tiers of I don't even know how to explain it, but it's like what I was saying. It's like, you know, when I was growing up, like I'm just going to relate this from my personal experience. When I had Thai friends, I had different types of Thai friends, different type of Asian friends. I had Thai friends who were very Thai, and they spoke only Thai and were only like, you know, only hung out amongst them people who only spoke Thai. And then I had like the Thai Americans who were like myself, who were born there. And then we kind of related in a different way. And I'm not saying I think we're also being sensitive about this, because we're not saying it's not wrong or right. It's just that when we break it down, there's like a lot of different layers. I mean, break it down to like, you know, just living in the Western society, whether it's like, you know, like in the UK or the US, and then the different types of friends that you hang out with. So there's a different you know, perspective depending on the group of friends you're with, and then you relate differently. So I think that's a situation. And then you go over to Asia, or here I'm in Asia, I'm in Thailand, then you have the same thing too. You know, you have like, you know, I think one of the things that like me and you, we were working for like the same company. Like the company was mixed. I mean, there was a lot of expats mixed with a lot of Thais. So then you had like you had different perspectives. And then like if you are in society here, then depending on what group you're with or who you're talking to, then the mindset's kind of different too. It's what they're exposed to. And I guess it's like what Tanya was saying. It's like at the end of the day, it's like, you know, it's really what you're exposed to, and sort of like a lot of factors kind of play an important role. Your family, what you're exposed to, how much you're exposed to it, what information you absorb, and all that kind of contributes to kind of, it defines who you are in a way. And I think that what Tanya was saying, the more secure you are as a person, then you're less affected by the noise and what you hear on the surface. And it's not wrong, it's not right, but I guess like that's why we're having this conversation. It's just to have like an option out there for people just to hear conversations, and know that it's okay just to not have to follow the trends, or like, you know, to be able to ask questions. I think that's important. I think like a lot of times when we're in a hierarchy, you're kind of put in a situation where you don't you're not as confident to ask questions. And I guess that still exists in this generation. Yeah.
For sure.
And
To me, that
yeah. No, I was just gonna say like something as simple as when we first had our first meetup, and it was over Zoom. But I think it kind of goes back to what you were talking about how, I guess from a Western sort of upbringing, it's like respect is actually based on getting to know the person, rather than saying like, okay, well, I'm Piat and I'm older than you, therefore you respect me. I guess like my mentality is kind of like, oh, well, you get to know me, and then we kind of we build that respect for one another. But I guess like in certain cultures, or like in Eastern culture, it's like it's by automatic that you need to respect someone who's elder than you, which is fine, that's part of our culture. But I think because we're moving into new times, new generations, like I think it has to be heard both ways. I think that's why, like, you know, when I'm talking to you two, it's like it's not so much that I'm older than you or you're younger than me, we're just having a conversation, and then we're sharing.
Yeah, I think to me that's a lot to do with cultures, different cultures is like a culture, like a hierarchical culture, a culture of fear of like, oh no, if I'm out of place, like gonna get in trouble or kind of it's so I think very much in a sense of like what cultures are there and kind of what cultures is one grounded in, right? And so I think for me, I see that a lot in the classroom. So like the ways that you would teach in the US, it's a lot more like, okay, like open, like seminar style, like I would love to hear your opinion. And for me, it's really important that people co-create knowledge because if it's a lecture, I'm like, you can Google it, you can listen to YouTube. Like me being here, I'd like to learn together with students. So I think that to me is part of it. But for example, going back to Thailand, I have to like adapt again. So I'm thinking about when I'm going back, for example, or when I have to lecture or teach, what are different ways of engagement that appeal to different cultures. And with a shifting culture, like how do you then ground yourself in that? I think that's part of it. It's I think it's a challenge, but it's one that it's not predetermined. So opening it up to possibilities and asking questions, I think is great, right? And thinking about the middle space, like between like Singapore, Thailand, the US, wherever, right? And then using all those different lessons to kind of like open different possibilities for Thai students. At least for me, I think that's kind of fulfilling and meaningful. And that's kind of what I enjoy as well, which is just creating knowledge with different people. And thinking through hierarchy. So instead of being like, okay, is this hierarchical? No, well, how do you agree with this, right? And so having people ask those critical questions, like, okay, if you agree with it, why? Or if you don't agree with it, why, right? And so then people are grounded in their own sense, whether that's family, whether that's politics, whether that's different places they grew up. So I think kind of at least my role as like an educator in some sense, that's something that I enjoy a lot.
I think you actually pinpointed because I because I was going to bring up um a point about like, well, at the same time, like we're also living in an age where it's like everyone has a say just for the sake of having a say. But I think what you were saying is like, okay, it's okay to have a say, but then you need to be able to clarify why you're having that say. It's just like, it's like, well, I'm gonna say this because I can say it. And then there's nothing to really back it up. And I think we're also living in a um in a generation that a lot of people are just wanting to be opinionated, but then at the same time, you're kind of confused because then their opinions get kind of confused when you break it down too. So I think there has to be clarity behind it as well. I think that's why it's like healthy debate is good debate,
Yeah.
not just for the sake of having emotional debates.
Yeah.
Right.
Do you
I
two
feel like
have
that's
it? Yeah.
nowadays. It's a lot of emotional debate or a lot of like resistance purely because I'm going to go against the norm, right? Like when I was ตอนที่ไปทำงานที่พวกโรงพยาบาลก็เป็นระบบของรัฐบาลนะเนาะเป็นโรงพยาบาลรัฐบาลก็เราไม่รู้เลยว่าเอกชนเป็นยังไงแต่ที่เราเห็นเนี่ยก็คือ I think it's a great thing to have that cultural component the respect that comes with titles or age or whatever มันก็เป็นสิ่งที่สวยงามแต่ว่าเราคิดปัญหามันอยู่ที่ how open-minded are both ends คือ how receptive is ไม่จะเป็นที่แบบฉันเป็นอาจารย์ที่เป็นคนที่อายุมากกว่าอยู่ต้องฟังฉันสิ่งที่ฉันพูดคือความจริงคือสิ่งที่ใช่สิ่งที่ถูกแต่ว่าหนูคิดว่า it's kind of like being open to hearing the perspectives of the younger generation as well and I think that's something where they right now is the battle right now is kind of like how do we constructively exchange ideas and be open to each other's ideas, but most importantly, be respectful. Just because someone's opinions don't align with yours or they're different doesn't make it any less valid or make it any less, it should still be respected, right? So even at the end of the conversation, if they still have their beliefs and you still have yours, that's completely fine. But at least throughout the time, the duration that you had that conversation, be open to learning from one another. I think that's something that should be done, but is very difficult to be done.
Kind of from your perspective, do you think this generation is kind of an agent of change in a sense, or is it one that kind of might reproduce the status quo, might just kind of like reintroduce the same things to previous generations, or do you think that this generation is doing something really different? Because if you see kind of like there's something like cycles in history, right? If you go back to like early 20th century or like the 1970s, 80s, there are a lot of similar elements that you see in kind of politics or society today. So I'm curious, like, is this generation any different or why, right? Is it the digital age that kind of marks this apart? So I guess from your perspective, yeah.
To answer your question, you two are an example of me seeing how things are promising. So for me that no,
Better than the
seriously.
other way around.
Seriously. I mean like you know, I mean like from getting to know you two separately and together, and it's like I follow you because you know you're like my little bro and you're like my little sis, and I see you going to DC. I seeing how passionate you are, and I think that's very important for this generation, to have people who are passionate. And I think you are in a generation that allows you to have a platform to showcase your passion. So that's a bit different from my generation, whereas like we didn't have the platform wasn't as mass or vast. So I find it hopeful and promising that because of having and there's others like yourselves too, where people can feel comfortable to want to be more passionate about their own future. On the other side, of course, I mean, along with you two, I see a lot of things that are like in reverse, and without having to go like so deep into it, but you know, politically, whether it's like in the Western world or the Eastern world, I mean, what we've witnessed in the last like few years, like it's a lot of like, you know, one step forward and then a couple steps backwards. And there's like a lot of things that, you know, from my time to now, things that should be progressing, women's movement, um racial discrimination, a lot of it is still at a standstill. So it's like it's kind of, and I don't want to use the word depressing, but it's kind of like it. I feel things should always move forward instead of like, you know, two steps forward and then four steps backwards. But it is what it is, and I just think what needs to be out there are yourselves and myself. You know, I think I don't really fit into my own generation either, which you two would know, because sometimes my generation, uh I don't relate so much because I'm always in tune with like the younger generation, so I don't lock myself in thinking the same way that I should think. So I guess we're examples of how things doesn't have to conform or be one way or another. I love how you two are nodding. I feel like I'm your lecturer.
It's true.
Wow.
We agreed. It is.
Another question that's a little more kind of like a little less thought heavy. What do you usually bring back for people in Thailand or the US, right? Like in
ของฝาก
how far it's key, you know, and I feel like it's changed, you know, like in the past there were things like I don't know, like leafy.
Carmex.
Yeah, so things you bring back like 10 years ago that now like you can get it in Thailand. So sure, like
Everything you can get in
globalization.
Thailand.
Yeah, so like what do you bring back for people, or do you bring back like photos, or do you bring back like hugs, or you know, like I'm just curious, like how do you,
Oh
or
gosh.
I don't know, like
Well, back in the day, well, I mean, it's different for me because back in the day, things were more unique when I brought it back from Thailand. Now you can find everything on like Lazada or Shopee or online. But I mean, like back in the day when I would visit, I just go to Chak and I pick up like random stuff, and they wouldn't even have that stuff back in the States. Now it's different. Now like things you go to Thai Town and you can find it. Um, and it's the other way around too. Like a lot of like the snacks and food that you wouldn't be able to find in the past, you can find it at your like at villa or like, you know. So I don't know in terms of like, I guess like I guess it comes down to what you can't find here and what you can't find there. Yeah. That's like,
yeah,
you know, very แบบเหมือนเบาๆอ่ะ
always a challenge. Now I'm just I don't know what to bring. Maybe I'll just take a photo, tag
Uh,
them on Instagram.
I have a go-to
mhm.
ยาดม
Yadom, Yadom.
ซื้อยาดมมาฝากชาวบ้าน
Here.
นี่
No, this is not an
ชาวบ้านไม่เอาก็
advertisement, but
ใช้ให้ตัวเอง
essential Thai living.
I don't
Maybe-
even use yadom. I smell it and I'm just like kind of gives me like mun. But yeah.
เราติด
So yeah, I think that's about it for me. I mean, like we'll catch up in like I'll catch up with you guys every couple months to see how what you're thinking and everything. So thank you so much for this session.
ขอบคุณค่ะ
ขอบคุณมาก
พี่
ครับ
ขอบคุณค่ะ
ครับผม
Bye guys.
Bye.